So I am your host, Erin Brightwell, faculty in ALC. And as always, I will start us off with a few general announcements before I introduce our speaker. So our next lecture is in 3 weeks. Please join us on Thursday, April 7th for Yukiko Uchida, who's professor of cultural and social psychology, Kokoro Research Center at Kyoto University. Professor Uchida will be speaking on the Japanese way of well-being and the self, an examination of local and working communities. And like today, the lecture will be at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time, Thursday night, or if you're in Japan, 8 a.m. Friday morning. For this event and future programs scheduled in our series, please check out our CJS events page, U of M, or various social media. As you know, this lecture is in a webinar-only format, thanks to COVID. Attendee webcams and microphones have been muted, but we invite you to use the Q&A function to submit questions during the lecture at any time that they arise, and we will address as many as we have time for. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sachiko Kawai, whom I first met at Kanbun Camp, an undisclosed number of years ago. Dr. Kawai holds a PhD in history from the University of Southern California, and she's currently an assistant professor and project researcher at the National Institutes for the Humanities, National Museum of Japanese History. Before moving there, she was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard's Reischauer Institute for Japanese Studies, and she has taught at both Harvard and USC. Dr. Kawai is the author of several articles, including most recently, Empowering Through the Mundane, Royal Women's Households in 12th and 13th century Japan, which is out this year in Japan Forum. But what brings us here today is the publication of her monograph. This came out late last year from Harvard University Asia Center on Certain Powers, Sen'yo, mon-in, and Land Ownership by Royal Women in Early Medieval Japan. This book, literally hot off the press, is a deep dive into the world of elite medieval women and their strategies for capitalizing on their land holdings. But rather than leave the summary to me, I will instead turn the floor over to Dr. Kawai so that she can introduce her work to us in her own words. Please join me first in offering her a warm welcome. Thank you, and Dr. Kawai, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Professor Erin Brightwell, for the nice introduction. Let me share the screen. Okay. Can you see this okay? I'm also very grateful to the Center for Japanese Studies of the University of Michigan for giving me this wonderful opportunity to introduce my book. As the title, Uncertain Powers, suggests, my book is about the power of medieval royal women who owned many landed estates across the Japanese archipelago during the 12th and 13th centuries. These women also held a title called mon-in and used their title-based prerogatives and their landholdings to play important roles in different spheres such as political, economic, religious, cultural, and even military. The master narrative of Japanese history, however, largely downplays mon-in history. Since I have only 40 minutes today, I will discuss my book content, focusing on a case study of a royal daughter, Sen'yo mon-in. But if you have any questions about my experience in the bookmaking process or other content of my book, please feel free to ask them during Q&A. Okay. For the case study of Sen'yo mon-in, I closely looked at an important primary source shown here, which I call the list of the Rokjo Palace estates. Historians have long overlooked this source, but I used it to explore Sen'yo mon-in's coping strategies to wield power through her land holdings. There were, however, limitations to her power. It fluctuated due to factors such as age, gender, marital status, and political ties. To cope with problems, Sen'yo mon-in and her followers supported each other out of mutual interest and strategized to sustain their power and authority. I argue that material goods and human resources sent from her estates were very important. They created the foundation of her power for many years of her life. My case study of Sen'yo mon-in highlights the interplay of power, authority, and gender, which also has some implications for present-day issues. Most Japanese people today do not know what nyoin means, but they usually know the term insei because it's an essential term for a history textbook or university entrance examinations. The period of insei, which is often considered as the late Heian and early Kamakura periods, is a time span that I examine in Uncertain Powers. Insei in English is retired monarch's governance. Here, retired monarch is in, and governance is sei in Japanese. So historians call this period insei by emphasizing the political influence of male retired monarchs. The basic idea is that a monarch stepped down from the official ruling position, but maintained his control over his son or grandson who had ascended the throne. But during this time period, royal women also received a title called nyoin that was the female equivalent to that of a retired monarch. However, since the end of the 8th century and throughout the medieval period, there were no actual female monarchs. So it's apparent that nyoin were not retired female monarchs. Well then, who are they? The nyoin title was created in the year of 991 to honor the mother of a monarch when she was retiring from her queen consort position. To create the new title, the modifier nyo, which means female, was attached to signify the gender difference. So a nyoin title was originally given to someone who was a biological mother of the monarch and had been a queen consort. When retiring, she received a nyoin title. But not long after the creation of the nyoin title, these two rules started loosening and opened the door for those who are not royal mothers. And during the late 11th century, even unmarried royal daughters, so apparently not royal wives, started to receive this title. So different types of nyoin existed. In fact, there was some discriminations against nyoin who did not meet the original requirements. Some medieval courtiers regarded them as being less prestigious, and Sen'yo mon-in was this irregular type of nyoin. When the requirements to become nyoin were getting loose, there was another change. Nyoin began inheriting and accumulating many estates. Royal women who held a nyoin title had an advantage because the title provided them with the right to establish an administrative headquarters large enough to manage many estates. Earlier studies, including those from the late 19th century, already acknowledged that nyoin held many estates, but they argued that nyoin had no power because a senior male royal had control over women's estates as the family head. By focusing on only male lineages, they dismissed women's roles in inheriting and managing estates. Studies focusing on nyoin themselves began to emerge at the end of the 20th century. In order to deny the traditional idea that royal women were landlords in name only, these studies argued that nyoin held rights to manage estates independently from male royals. These studies, however, overemphasized Nyoin as super rich and powerful, calling them medieval billionaires. I totally understand the necessity of challenging the old view, but I'm telling you today that the power of Nyoin was much more complex. They had different levels of strategic success, but there were also limitations to their power. Even when they oversaw many estates, this did not necessarily equate to wealth and power. For example, a royal daughter named Hachijoin inherited and accumulated 200 estates like this. However, I also found an interesting primary source, which was written by her female attendant, saying that whenever Hachijoin had to hold a special event, her storehouse was empty. This puzzling fact suggests that the number of estates Hachijoin owned and her economic power did not always match. In order to further advance Nyoin research and keep Nyoin as a worthy topic to study, we need to explain their power in a more nuanced manner. When I say a Nyoin owned estates, I mean that she held supreme proprietorship of the estates. What does supreme proprietorship mean? To answer this, I want to spend a little bit of time to explain the medieval estate system in Japan. Let's imagine this blue triangle represents the medieval estate system. The supreme proprietor, the highest position in this estate hierarchy, like Nyoin, held the strongest rights, for example, to appoint estate managers and settle disputes and so on. Under that, there was a managing proprietor, and there was sometimes a custodian. These people or institutions usually resided in the capital in Kyoto or near Kyoto, like Nara, but by dispatching their representatives, they managed their estates. Under them, there were local estate managers and officials. These people actually lived in the estate and administered local matters. And of course, there were estate residents and cultivators who worked in the field, and also fishermen who caught fish, or artisans who created some products, and others. Also, during the late 12th and 13th centuries, there were two political entities in Japan: the royal court in Kyoto and the Kamakura warrior government in the east. They co-governed the Japanese archipelago and sometimes competed with each other to gain more power. The warrior government appointed or sent out their housemen as land stewards to estates, which sometimes made the situation even more complicated. As we see here, the medieval Japanese estate system involved many people who jointly administered and shared income from the land. So even though a Nyoin held supreme proprietorship, we can't assume that her rights over land always guaranteed her economic power. And it was important for Nyoin to build wide and strong political networks to make sure to gain resources from her land. Through Sen'yo Moin's case study, I argue that she and her supporters worked together in order to strategically manage her estates. They were like a collective body or unit. They invested in each other and benefited from each other. I believe that the concepts of authority and power are important to answer the questions I addressed. Based on the scholarship of women's and gender history, I define authority as sociopolitically or could be legally acknowledged rights, and power as an actual ability to influence or get things done. Definitions of authority and power could be different depending on the field and the questions we ask, but I found these definitions useful to explore the complex power wielding mechanisms in the medieval estate system. Late 20th century scholarship of women's and gender history has done a great job explaining how those without authority managed to wield power. For example, women who did not have rights to vote still could influence others who held such legal rights. For example, they could whisper into the ears of their brothers, husbands, or sons, saying, you should vote this guy instead of that one. And then sometimes the men listened. Women also could act in a group to make a difference. So these scholars explain that women, despite a lack of authority, still could wield power. And as a result, they could sometimes gain authority. What this scholarship often failed to examine was whether women with authority, like Nyoin with strong rights over their land, actually wielded power. And if so, how? Here, authority and power are not opposing or antithetic entities. And it's important to see that authority and power work bilaterally. They may spirally increase or spirally decline. Now, I want to move on to my case study of Nyoin Sen'yo mon-in, who was the daughter of retired monarch Goshirakawa and Takashina no Eishi. Sen'yo mon-in received her Nyoin title in 1191, although she was unmarried and thus not a royal mother. The Nyoin authority she acquired allowed her to establish an administrative headquarters into which she incorporated her followers to support her as directors, administrative chiefs, and supervisors. Upon Goshirakawa's death in 1192, she inherited Rokujo Palace on Rokujo Avenue in the capital, and many estates supporting that property. Her palace included a Buddhist temple called Chokodo. By inheriting estates, she gained the authority of a supreme proprietor, as I said, the strongest rights to appoint estate officials, decide estate dues, send orders to local areas, and so on. By inheriting estates, she also received certain responsibilities, as I will discuss later. Previous studies have argued that it was natural, or it was of course, for Sen'yo mon-in to inherit many estates because she was Goshirakawa's most favorite child. She was, however, merely one of his many children, and she was the youngest daughter. Also, her siblings were half-siblings from different mothers. Moreover, her mother Eishi's family was politically kind of weak. Her father was a monk with no rank. So Sen'yo mon-in did not get a strong backing from her father's natal family. It was actually important in medieval Japan to receive political support from mother's family. Sen'yo mon-in's weak political standing was partially the reason why Sen'yo mon-in faced challenges in protecting the inherited estates right after her powerful father's death. Before discussing details about Sen'yo mon-in's challenges and her coping strategies, I first want to introduce the important primary source, which I mentioned earlier. I call the source the list of Rokujo Palace estates. The document lists 89 estates owned by Sen'yo mon-in. Although previous historians call it the list of Choko temple estates, I disagree with this naming because the estates listed in this document supported not only the Buddhist temple, but also the livelihood of her Rokujo palace, including the residential quarters. As I argue in my book, it was created during the 10th month of 1250, a few months before she was transferring her estate to her heir, monarch Gofukaku-san. And this year was actually about a year and a half before she died in 1252. The original is currently archived at Kyoto University Museum. This is a reading room of their archive. They brought this document out of storage for me to examine. The source consists of 2 scrolls, and here they are spread out across the tables. The length of each scroll is 28 centimeters, and the width is about 10 meters and 50 centimeters, very long. And as I said, there are 2 of them. This is the beginning of the document. The list starts with an estate name like Gantokuji, Shimokatsura Estate, Fushimi Domain, and after each estate name, miscellaneous dues, or kuji in Japanese, are listed. Let's look at the Shimokatsura Estate as an example. The first dues listed are materials for New Year, and after this category, 2 things are listed, blinds and the tatami mat. And these are those materials. So blinds rolled up, blinds rolled down, and the tatami mats with like different edges. And 1 ken, which is measurement, means width between 2 pillars, and 2 ken, width between 3 pillars. So here, 2 ken. So Shimokatsura Estate was submitting 2 ken, which is width of covering 3 pillars, blinds, as materials for New Year. And the next item says gold for the Lotus Sutra lectures. These were very important Buddhist services sponsored by Sen'yo mon-in. Ibis is for the 5th day of the 5th month event. Modern Japanese people still observe this seasonal festival. Tatami for the new season. So as you can see here, an important characteristic of miscellaneous dues is that they were collected for specific purposes, such as for seasonal interior renewal or for a certain Buddhist event. In that way, miscellaneous dues were different from annual rent or nengu, which are collected without mentioning specific usages. The estate names and the miscellaneous dues consist of the basic information of the list of Rokujo Palace estates. But if you look at very closely, you can see additional marks and also additional notes like this. And there are actually 2 major additions. Black comments added first, red comments added after the black notes. And they tell us about changing due submission conditions. This is a part of Ichimura Takata estate with color photo. So you can see notes better. These are black small notes. And they tell that this Ichimura Takata estate stopped submitting these items. It's called kore wo tsutomezu. So, Ichimura Takata estate stopped submitting many items, and then red mark, slash mark was added, which means that Ichimura Takata estate has been submitting this item, which is blinds. And there is red note on the shoulder of estate name saying 毎年ミスばかりこれを務む。This estate has been submitting only blinds every year. Let's look at another example. Wada estate. This says, Gomen, exempted. So this means that Wada estate was exempted from paying all the listed dues, like here. I made this chart based on the list of Rokujo Palace estates by randomly choosing different items. 100% here represents the total amount of the items Sen'yo mon originally expected to receive. As seen here, many items stopped coming as time went by. This is a quite depressing picture, but in order to provide a different perspective, I investigated how many estates were actually exempted from all the miscellaneous dues like the aforementioned Wada estates. Then I got this. Only 15% of the listed estates were exempted from the beginning. And even when additional 10% received exemptions, 75% of the total estates were still functioning and sending Sen'yo mon at least partial dues. To limit a decline in miscellaneous dues and maintain her authority and power, Sen'yo mon and her officials used several strategies. First, she highlighted her inherited responsibility of sponsoring Buddhist rituals at the Choko temple, especially the Lotal Sutra lectures for Goshirakawa. During the late Heian times, Nyoin, especially unmarried royal daughters, often inherited estates and took the role of consoling the souls of their family members. To hold the lectures every year, Sen'yo mon requested a small amount of alluvial gold from a majority of the estates on the list. I believe it was a strategy to minimize the risk of having a significant loss. Also, the task of memorializing Goshiraka's death carried political and religious meanings. Since her political position was weak right after her father died, acquiring the rights and responsibilities to commemorate his death was significant. Levying this special due over more than 50 estates, she continuously reminded many of her father's former followers who used to manage the Rokujo estates under him that she took on this important role. In contrast with some other dues, which eventually stopped to be delivered, a majority of the estates continued to send gold to support this ritual. So by highlighting her responsibility, she and her staff members worked together to reinforce her authority over her estates, which helped her to maintain the power to collect necessary resources. Another example was the blinds for New Year's. 100% here represents the total amount of blinds Sen'yo mon originally expected to receive, but 3% of them stopped coming, and by the red note additions, 18% more were exempted. However, 79% of them were still coming, and in comparison to other items, Sen'yo mon actually had greater success in securing blinds. Similar to the case of the memorial service for her father, Sen'yo mon and her officials collected New Year's materials in pieces from many estates rather than relying on a few estates to cover a large amount. And I believe that it decreased the risk of losing many of dues at once. With the use of her estates, she renewed interior items every New Year's. She received New Year's guests at her palace, including powerful courtiers like the regental head and his heir. Seemingly trivial matters such as procuring new blinds and straw mats were crucial because by creating an appropriate setting for receiving guests, she could confirm her relationship with influential courtiers and reinforce her image as a useful ally. These material resources not only signified her economic wealth, but also supported her Nyoin authority to enhance her political power. This is dry, sorry. Another important strategy related to material goods was to consolidate Sen'yo Moin's relationship with her officials and attendants. One such item was curtains. A majority of the curtains from Sen'yo Moin's estates were used for her male attendants, saburai or samurai in Japanese. Her male attendant office, Saburai Dokoro, was around here. And for this place, she collected approximately 20 curtains each year. The high demand of curtains suggests that quite a few male attendants regularly served at her residence. Early medieval samurai consisted of not only those specialized in military schools, but also household officials with high literary and accounting skills. They took care of materials sent from estates by procuring food and manufactured goods such as leather, lacquer, and metal products. By regularly redecorating the space where her samurai gathered, Sen'yo Moin demonstrated how she valued their roles in maintaining and protecting her immediate surroundings. Floor and seating materials were another example. There were different types of seating, actually, depending on the edges, to show the social status of users, like this. Among these, Sen'yo Moin collected many common types that were used by senior nobles without ministerial posts. In total, she received 199 common materials, constituting 47% of all the flooring items sent from the estates. Senior nobles without ministerial posts who used the common materials were a majority members of the Council of State, where they took key roles in this decision-making at the government level. For them, working at a powerful household like Nyoin's palace was advantageous or crucial to pursue their own political and economic advancement. For Nyoin, it was also advantageous to recruit them into her circle. Through them, Sen'yo Moin could receive updates on political developments and attempt to exert some influence on discussions of the Council of State. Additionally, some of her female attendants, or nyobo in Japanese, likely occupied the third court rank, which was equivalent to the status of non-ministerial senior nobles. So these women also used common materials. You can see female attendants sitting on the actually common mats on this scroll. Female attendants played important roles, cultural roles, supporting the salons of their patrons. They also managed estates as custodians. For example, the custodian of Sen'yo Moin's Shimokatsura estate was a woman called Lady of the Third Rank. So, by creating spaces for people who supported the Rokujo Palace in economic, political, and cultural spheres, the material goods sent from Sen'yo Moin's estates helped to strengthen the trusted relationship between the Nyoin and her followers. Another important type of strategy was having military or security protection. To fully understand the Nyoin strategies to maintain security, we first needed to explain or examine gender differences between the offices of male-in and Nyoin. According to protocol handbooks such as Shugaisho, an administrative headquarters for a retired monarch looked like this. Anyoin also had similar organization, but there were differences. It lacked warrior's office and office of bodyguards. In addition, mon-in had private military units known as west or north-facing warriors, but I found no source showing that Nyoin organized such military units. Well then, how did Nyoin protect themselves and their residences? Let's try to answer this question by using the case of Sen'yo mon-in. When Go-Shirakawa was still alive, he had his administrative headquarters at the Rokujo Palace, and Sen'yo mon-in lived with him. Although her Nyoin office lacked military bureaus, her father's warriors protected her. So, a Nyoin who lived with a mon-in could use his guards. In 1192, however, Sen'yo mon-in lost her father, and the situation changed. Soon after she started administering the Rokujo household, she faced a security crisis. According to the Kamakura government chronicle, Azuma Kagami, there was nobody protecting the residence of Sen'yo mon-in, which used to be the late retired monarch's palace. To survive this emergent situation, Sen'yo mon-in, as well as her mother, sought political networks, including old ties based on the deceased father, and built new ones. An important one was that with the Kamakura shogunate, from whom they ultimately received assistance. So the second strategy was Nyoin gained military protection through political and human networks. One drawback of using this strategy is that it made Nyoin dependent upon other powerful figures. And as we know, political ties usually did not last forever. It was necessary to establish a long-lasting security system. So the third strategy used by Sen'yo mon-in was establishing an estate-based security system. The Rokujo Palace where she lived had 5 gates, as you can see here. Let's look at the miscellaneous dues levied on Yamaka estate as example. One of its dues was gate guard or monheishi. Under this, specific information was written, how they were assigned at a specific gate for a specific month. According to the list of Rokujo Palace estates, there are 3 guards assigned at each gate like this. Previous studies assumed that Go-Shirakawa had already established this gate guard system and transferred it to Sen'yo mon-in as a nice package. But I disagree with this view because if Go-Shirakawa had already set up the system, it's unlikely that the guards of the Rokujo Palace suddenly fell to 0 after his death. The security crisis happened in the 9th month, and this is the plan for that month. Here, Abura Gate had no guards, but there were at least 12 guards providing protection. So it's more likely that Sen'yo mon-in and her officials developed this system probably after experiencing the security crisis. During the late Heian and Kamakura periods, the number of unmarried Nyoin increased. Because they were neither royal wives nor royal mothers, they had lesser access to the military power of a monarch or his retired father. Due to the gender difference in administrative rules, then it was crucial for a Nyoin to set up a long-lasting security system. And Sen'yo mon-in's estate-based system protected her palace for actually more than 6 decades. To maintain her authority and power, Sen'yo mon-in had to enhance delivery of estate dues. Here, incorporating the local level interest was crucial. For example, this chart shows the first month's plan of gate guards. Abu domain in So was sending many guards. This is the second month. Tottori estate in Bizen and Matsui estate in Harima provinces were sending many girls, and those provinces were close together. For the 6 months, Rokka estate in Higo were sending the most girls. For the 12th month, Sakakita estate in Echizen were sending all the girls. Of course, it was not perfect, but there was a tendency that Sen'yo Moi and her officials were collecting girls from the same estates or neighboring areas during the same times of the year. I think it was because traveling in a group was economically and psychologically advantageous for those girls. They could share costs and assist each other during the trip by procuring food together, finding accommodations, and protecting themselves from thieves or animals. After arriving in the capital, having people from the neighboring regions also prevented them from feeling isolated. There's another strategy. Abdomen Suo, which was providing 9 gate guards, was also sending many items like this. By combining the timing of sending human resources with that for material resources, Sen'yo Moi and her officials helped the estate residents effectively transport dues to the capital. As we learned from the black and red notes, however, it was of course challenging to receive dues as planned, but probably because of that, it was even more important for Sen'yo Moi to help her estates to save time and cost as much as possible. And such efforts could enhance her chance to maintain power and the livelihood of the Rokujo Palace. Before ending my talk, I'd like to discuss a little bit about how Nyoin history intersects with present-day issues. In my book, I discuss various elements of Nyoin history, including changing inheritance patterns and gender disparity at the medieval Japanese court, which shows how the Heian and Kamakura royal families needed their women's participation in court politics to sustain their influence. At the same time, however, these women were allowed to participate with slightly fewer privileges than those given to their male counterparts. I believe that such unequal power relations seen in the pre-modern monarchical system are still relevant to understanding today's issues. For example, Nyoin cases encourage us to rethink today's royal succession problem in Japan. In 2001, when a long-awaited child of the emperor, that time the crown prince of Japan, was born, it was a baby girl, Princess Aiko. Her birth was greeted with mixed feelings because under the imperial household law, the emperor should be a male. Her birth created a heated debate over the possibility of a female emperor. Her birth also encouraged scholars to investigate lives and roles of Japanese royal daughters in the past. In 2006, however, the son of the younger prince was born. After that, the debate over female monarchs somehow subsided. I believe it's important to continue to study about royal daughters to understand why the emperor in modern Japan, who is a symbol for the unity of Japanese people, should be a male. And how does this existing ideology contribute to ongoing gender inequality in present social, political, and legal arenas? There were influential royal women who inherited royal estates and played important religio-political, cultural, and economic roles. Royal women created strategies to cope with gender disparity. My research showed the importance of their history. Today, I introduced the case study of Sen'yo Moi by using the list of the Rokujo Palace estates. Previous historians dismissed this source or never imagined it could be useful to explain women's power. In fact, its innocuous data revealed interesting strategies used by the Nyoin and her supporters to gain political, economic, and military power. And it showed how such power fluctuated over time. By exploring the gap between authority and the power of Nyoin, I also showed that it's important to investigate how socio-cultural or institutional rules constructed power relations between male and female in. On the other hand, gender disparity encouraged Nyoin to formulate creative strategies. For example, a lack of military offices in her administrative headquarters necessitated Sen'yo Moi and her officials to come up with different means, such as cultivating political networks and developing an estate-based guard system to cope with the problem. The gap between authority and power is everywhere, and you might think this is obvious, but I think it's quite complex and we should pay attention to it. Having authority does not guarantee us power. We need to strategize to wield power. Otherwise, we might lose the authority we have. I believe that by investigating historical examples of the strategic use of authority, we can better understand the changing political, social, and power dynamics around us. And this helps us be responsible to opportunities and also challenges to wielding power. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that really informative talk. I think people are still going to need a little bit of time to digest before as they submit their questions, but I am at an advantage having read your book recently too. So I've had a little bit of time to kind of try and draw this together. So I would like I'll start us off then while people are composing their thoughts. And I'd like to touch on the point that you started to make at the end, right? So, I think both the book and the talk, you make a really strong case for saying, this is the really outdated model, and then this is the overcorrection. And then I'm going to show you that it's actually kind of this complicated mess in the middle. Mess isn't really fair on my part because you offer us some concrete strategies then, and then also contextualize those in comparison with other royal women. So I was wondering though about one of the things that you said in the book where you said you would like this to be a takeaway to think about how we approach women's history. Because, as we were talking about before, Nyoin are at I would say, I hope I'm not overstating, a gendered disadvantage, but they're still royal. We're still looking at a pretty rarefied air. So I wondered if you could give us a sense of, how you see your intervention as contributing to new or emerging conversation in women's history. Thank you.
Thank you so much for great, question. And yes, you are absolutely right. My focus is on, special elite women. Maybe, I don't know how, maybe 0.1% of Japanese population at that time. I have no idea. I just made up the number, but it's very thin layer, of population. But sometimes, their challenges tell us, like today, both men and women, about how it's difficult to wield or exercise authority to wield power. And I think we can probably learn from their past and their challenges. And I often try to rethink, we look at elite women or privileged people, like we are sort of privileged today, I think, in some ways, because we are living in a safe, calm daily life, instead of facing, emergency challenge, emergent, crisis or security crisis right now. But when I look at elite women like Nyoin, even though they're much better off, economically better off than, for example, male cultivators of that time, we still need to look at them with men of their socio-political and economic kind of group, men and women in the same social and economic standing, then you can see the difference. And I think it's really important for women and gender history. Basically, you have to look at the queen and the king instead of queen and male cultivators. Then you see gender disparity, which has been, I feel like, continuing for centuries. Does it make sense?
Yes, thank you. Just give me a second to find my unmute button. Great. Well, do we have questions from the audience yet? If not, I have more. So I'm happy to monopolize the Q&A, but I want to make sure that I'm not monopolizing it. I am going to go ahead and ask you another one then while we wait. This is a much smaller one. So one of the things that I was curious about, especially hearing it again in the talk, is, taking this deep dive into Sen'yo mon-in's strategies. For some reason, the alluvial gold collection really stuck with me. I was like, if you just give homework to everybody, at least somebody will do it probably. And so I was wondering if you have a sense of how many of her strategies were unique to her, or if there was sort of a set of strategies that royal women came back to over and over again.
Okay, let's see. Some of, I think there are maybe two questions, sort of like, I think like when we look at, if Sen'yo mon-in strategies are unique, just for her, maybe among women, but also among men and women, right? In that case, and the second probably one is alluvial gold. That one is maybe later I talk about it. But anyway, her strategies are sometimes similar to male proprietors too. So it's not just only gender, but some strategies are very gender centered, like security power. I think it was because women needed more. So they were like probably put in the corner. We have to find some way to get out of this. And they sort of like, I didn't mean only Nyoin. They are supporters. Sometimes their mothers, sisters, living in the same spot. And also their officials who are, they are sort of like mutual like people. They needed her, and her authorities maintained strong. That's why they could probably be promoted at court. They could manage her estates and gain some economic, wealth. So those people, as a unit, came up with strategies. So I think we shouldn't always think, it was, her father, created, creative genius were always men like that. The women sometimes could be creative and smart. So I think military based strategy was something unique, long-lasting, especially estate-based system. Well, I think developed by a lot of women's efforts, I feel like. And some other strategies like, let's see, I didn't really find concrete examples, but I assume that dividing important dues to many estates, without relying on a few estates to bring in everything. I think that was a strategy probably used by both men and women, because it's very important. It's very smart to do that.
Great, thank you. Audience members, please send in your questions so that I don't just monopolize the conversation, although as I said, I'm very happy to do so, but I really don't want to deprive you of a chance to ask Dr. Kawai about this book or her upcoming projects. I know that she's got some new, a new research focus I don't want to say too much about. So while I go ahead and give people a little bit more time to formulate, I'm going to ask you one more question since I have time.
Okay.
And this is such a great opportunity. I would like to know that I was thinking about to your example of the, what was it, the Rokudo estates. I forget the list of the Rokudo estates. And you talked about this estates that were exempted. And this is just a really little question, but I wondered, you know, did anybody ever bother to offer any sort of explanation or excuse when they didn't send stuff in, or did they just stop sending?
Yeah, I think probably Sen'yo mon-in, the official tried to get the source like pushed. And I know sometimes, especially at the beginning when Sen'yo mon-in faced the security crisis, and probably she had some trouble with getting resources from her other estates. It was like, you know, to 1195 or something that time. She asked the shogunate, Minamoto no Yoritomo, to kind of issue the order or something to, you know, make sure 3 or 4 estates to bring resources to her estates. So it was kind of interesting. I think it's partially because it was a kind of warfare time too, but you know, right after the kind of unstable time periods. But I think in later times, she probably also asked someone else, she also issued the order to, you know, push a little harder, but sometimes, you know, it's hard to, probably it was her wishlist and it didn't work out as, you know, much as she wanted, but yeah.
Thank you. Let me give you a question from the audience now. So we have a question that begins, of course, with thanking you for your research and says, could you say more about the various rituals that Nyoin and other women were barred from participating in?
Oh, barred from, oh, they couldn't.
Right.
Let's see. I know that, you know, there are some kind of sacred areas like during the medieval period in Japan, women couldn't enter or something. Like one of them was like, you know, some koya, Mount Koya areas. So, you know, some Nyoin, like specifically Bifukumon Hachijoin's mother, wanted to be buried, or probably she wanted to go there too. She was a big time kind of like Buddhist, like believers, but she couldn't enter the area until she died. After she died, she could, you know, probably gender was not really, you know, big a deal, and she could be buried there. But other examples, like when Sen'yo, in terms of Sen'yo mon-in's example, and of course like other ones, I didn't encounter any primary sources that say, okay, Nyoin wanted to sponsor these Buddhist services or maybe kami rituals, but because they were women, they couldn't sponsor or they couldn't maybe attend. But I might be wrong, but it, you know, I probably should pay attention to that kind of issues, you know, even though she wanted to, you know, provide resources or she wanted to be invited. Oh, you know, she shouldn't be because her gender, you know, is not really matching or something. Yeah, sometimes, you know, like exactly same primary source, I miss to get such important information, and I reread to, you know, look for that kind of, you know, information. Then I found it. Does it happen to you? Oh my God, I read this 3 times.
Yes, it's not just you.
Oh, I didn't see. So I think it's also like very relevant to women's and gender history. Very established historians say, oh, I didn't notice it. Let me see. Oh, yeah, it actually means, women are participating. So, well,
Yes, thank
women
you.
were barred. Okay, sorry.
Thank you for at least I know I'm not alone in not picking up everything the first time when I read primary sources. We have a bunch of questions in the queue now, so let me just start getting to them. So this question says, I was hopeful that your research will re-energize the discussion of female or women succeeding in the Japanese monarchy in the future, or female succession. Beyond mere male chauvinism, what are the typical arguments that Japanese scholars are advancing in support of insisting on only men being able to assume the position of emperor? And then building on sort of as a related question, how did Japanese scholars react to the United Kingdom officially adopting the oldest child, male or female, to succeed in the monarchy? So I'm sorry, I didn't read that very smoothly, but it's in the chat, or it's in the questions for you to look at. But I think, yeah, if you could just start us off talking about, are there scholarly reasons? Are there scholars saying we should only have men who succeed to the chrysanthemum throne? And if so, what are they?
So there are, I don't want to make it to two groups fighting each other, but there is a group of modern historians in Japan, and also politicians argue that Japanese monarchs / emperors were always male, were traditionally male. And I don't know how they get that, but they usually use the theory or argument that, female monarchs existing in the past, like Nara period, were only intermediate, sort of like passing on the throne to next to heir, which should be, male. So they don't mean really anything much. They are just like, stepping in to help the continuation of no breaking stones, like royal line or something. So some people just sometimes just deny, oh, no female monarchs, or we don't talk about it. And if someone say, oh, there are female monarchs in the past, even in other period, then they say, oh, they are just like, intermediate person. But women's and gender history scholars say, no, actually these female monarchs, for example, like Jito Tenno, Sachiko Tenno, they were actual political and sometimes even military leaders of Japan, the head of Japanese archipelago. So I guess those people are either, I hope they talk to each other more, but sometimes they don't talk. And the politicians usually support the ones who argue, oh, traditionally always male kind of thing. And the female monarchs were kind of weird, rare offshoots or something. Like I don't think that's right, but that's the situation in Japan, unfortunately. Yes.
Women's achievements being brushed under the rug as mere placeholders. Okay, sorry, that's depressing. I don't want to take your question time. So we have another question, thank you. Starting out by congratulating you on this book. This is a wonderful contribution, the person says, to women's history, which I look forward to using for decades to come. My question was actually asked of me, of the questioner, by a colleague, and I reread your, sorry, it just put out of the screen. My question was actually asked of me by a colleague, and I reread your book trying to find the answer. Were the XX-in appellations in the case of female gendered in related to where these women actually lived? I thought this was the case for male gendered in, but my sense was that this did not hold true for women. Please advise.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have to digest this
Yeah,
question.
there's
Hold
a
on.
lot.
So,
I mean, I think in a sense, this person is asking, where do the names come from? Like Bifuku mon-in. Like, is this coming from a place that she lives, or is it coming from somewhere else?
oh, okay. So I see. So the new title given to individuals, or were they gendered or not? Is that the question?
I think the question is, like if it's a male, then the name derives from where he lives, right? Like
right. Yeah.
But if it's a woman, is that also true? Like, does Bifuku mon-in live in some place that I don't know? I'm twisting person's words. Like
that's a good question. I mean, all of the questions I have received so far, great question, and this is a very good question. And then I think yes, knowing name were originally derived from the place they lived. First one was Higashi Sanjo-in, and she lived in, she was a regental daughter, so it was from her residence, Higashi Sanjo. And the next one, Kyoto mon-in, she was also regental daughter of Fujiwara no Michinaga, famous one, right? But Kyoto mon-in is famous too. And Kyoto mon-in lived in also Higashi Sanjo mansion, and that mansion's main road was sort of connecting to the royal palace's Kyoto gate. So it was also like some connections to her residence. And whenever knowing title was decided, there were long discussion, and there are a lot of like choices. Which one is most auspicious or lucky or pretty, and it seems like, especially mid-heian to late Heian, like knowing kind of like title, like discussions to decide knowing titles, say that those gate-based knowing titles were very lucky or auspicious. So they prefer that. It seems like, I think it's because Kyoto mon-in, the second knowing, Fujiwara no Michinaga's daughter, was very successful. She brought a lot of, luck to the regental family. And also, she was a royal mother, mother of two tenno. So she was also kind of lucky one. That's why she made the precedent that, okay, gate-based knowing names are very, prestigious. But as you see, Hachijo-in, she was living on the residence or palace on Hachijo Avenue, and there Hachijo does not have any relation to those royal gates. But she was successful. Sometimes she faced difficulties, but she did quite well. So there are many different variations, but oh, by the way, Sen'yo mon is also like royal gate, based on royal gate Sen'yo mon. But her case was not really based on her residence. She could be Rokujo-in, but there are also other Rokujo in. I mean, kind of, I'm sorry to go on so long, but there was another previous nyoin called Ikuho mon-in, and she was living on Rokujo Palace, different Rokujo Palace, and her nickname was some sort of like, name was Rokujo-in or something. Primary sources list her as the Rokujo-in sometimes. So I think that's why probably to avoid the confusion, Rokujo-in was not used for later nyoin.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Let me take you to the next question then. Thank you. It begins with, thank you, Dr. Kawai, for a most thought-provoking lecture. My question falls outside of your study, but I'm wondering how long the nyoin system continued. Also, in the medieval period, how were female members of the imperial family in general supported financially if they were unmarried or if their husbands died before them? I know that there are some imperial convent temples in Kyoto. Were these part of the system for supporting female members of the imperial family, including widowed consorts or daughters of deceased emperors? Thank you.
Thank you for great questions. So the first question was, I think, Nyoin institution, how long it lasted, right? It lasted until the beginning of Meiji period. During Meiji, at the beginning of Meiji time, it was abolished, but it continued for centuries. So it's sort of like amazing. Why don't we learn as a Japanese citizen in Japan who took history courses, didn't really learn Nyoin? And still today's junior high school textbooks don't really give a definition of Nyoin. But the good thing is the word term Nyoin appear in the footnote now, like a famous like Yamakawa Shuppansha text. And some individual Nyoin appear, like I think maybe Kenrei Moin might appear, but no definition of Nyoin. So people sometimes say to me, like very knowledgeable specialist, like she has doctor and in medieval Japanese literature, asked me, "Oh, Kawai-san, Nyoin means a nun, right? Like the person, like Ama-san, or no, it's not really. Sometimes yes, but not really the definition." But okay, or something like that. So okay, so people even who studies medieval literature actually doesn't know, and she had education in Japan. So I feel like okay, textbook should include Nyoin more in the main text, not in like nenpyo なんだろう、those like additional materials attached to main textbook. Those things actually have a small Nyoin information, but people don't really study that much. They have colors, but nice color. And
thank you. Did you want to?
Okay.
It was kind of a long question with another. There is another part to it, just as a refresher.
Okay. Yeah.
So
okay. And another actually, I'm sorry. The second question maybe about the convent thing, like medieval convents and the widows.
Yeah. Let me. Could I revisit it just for the audience to? So the second part of the question was asking how in the medieval period female members of the imperial family in general were supported financially if they were unmarried or if their husbands died before them.
Okay.
And the person that mentions, I know there are some convent temples in Kyoto where these part of a system for supporting female members of the imperial family of this type.
Thank you. I think later, the period I study, like the 12th and 13th centuries Japan, usually there are, I think maybe she, that like Nyoin level people, like royal daughters who own the estate had their own vow temples. So even though they are unmarried, there are many unmarried royal daughters at that time. So it was some people who are married and became widowed. Still they had their own vow temples. So this, and also many estates attached to the vow temple, and they had residence in the temple. So they could, use those financial, supports. But later period, I think more like late medieval times, there are more difficulties to support themselves for royal daughters, or maybe royal, princesses 2 or 3 generations that detached from the monarch. So those royal women were probably women had opportunities to live after they lost their husbands or maybe their parents at the convent. There was a system to support them. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Answer the question.
Um, I think so, but and there are other questions too. So I want to make sure that I give some time to those. So this is another question about the royal family. So once again, thank you for your interesting talk. You identified a lot of strategies to gain power. Today, however, royal family members appear to pretend that they transcend such worldly power struggles. Is this pretension a strategy in and of itself? So I wonder if this strategy of pretending to transcend power might exist in medieval Japan. And also, if the royal family members use this strategy, I'm curious about what kind of power they seek. So do you see this Yoi pretending to not be interested as a way of actually being strategic, I guess strategic disinterest as a way of accruing power?
That's a really intriguing question. Again, like I probably want to look at the primary sources or courtier journals again to see if I can find that kind of like a hint. You know, you are not, you are just sitting and I don't know anything, but just like looking at someone, and then that means you have to work harder to get that, wealth or gold. But yeah. Sometimes like strategies could be they sort of humble. I remember the kind of prayer dedicatory prayers Hachijoin wrote, or she probably ordered someone to write, but it contains a lot of personal feelings or experience. I feel like she had something to do with composing that prayer dedicated to Yashimitsu's shrine. But that's, she used this very humble expression, oh, I'm a woman. Even though I'm a female, I do this, or, I don't have sort of like power kind of like, weak kind of like expression, then that could be a strategy. And also I remember the Koken Shotoku Tenno, the last, classical female monarch during 8th century. She also used this, although a woman, I'm gonna ascend the throne, when she was going to be monarch, Tenno. So maybe they pretend I'm a weak women, like kind of like I can't do this, I'm not really like eligible or something, like even though I don't think they thought that way, but those royal women might use that rhetoric to avoid unnecessary conflicts. That's a good question.
Interesting. Thank you. Let me see. It looks like we have one more question. So perfect timing. This is another question going back to that earlier topic of rituals and women's access to, or lack of access to, certain spaces, right? So once again, I'm wondering about the Engisiki provisions about female-specific kegare. Is there anything in your sources that might indicate that such provisions actually had any concrete impact on any of the Yoin's activities?
Yeah, I think there are. I just cannot like give concrete examples like at the right this moment, and I always feel like, oh, I should have said this that time, and then this came after I signed off the meeting, or But I believe there are some difficulties to do some activities you wanted. Maybe it's, I said that certain rituals barring women from attending, especially for Nyoin cases who were trying to sponsor rituals, but some kegare concept was restrictions might affected their sometimes daily activities, and also being at some certain space do you have any idea like the English? You know what? I will study English harder in detail to look for information. Thank you for really good kind of, how do you say, food for thought?
Yes.
Really. Yes, I get some like, inspiring questions to work on.
Great. Yeah, sadly, I can't help you. I don't think I have looked at English since we were at Kambun Camp that undisclosed
Yes.
number of years ago. So
Yeah, 懐かしい。
anyway, so on that happy note, thank you everybody. It's almost 8:30 and I know it's obscenely early still for Dr. Kawaii, and for the rest of us it's getting past the end of our work days, I hope. So I would like to conclude, but I hope everyone is joining me, even though you are muted, as attendees in thanking Dr. Kawaii for a really stimulating talk. And I hope that we will see you, our audience members, again in 3 weeks. So thank you and good night.